We're talking investments, the economy, and Canadian politics with Kevin O'Leary, star of Shark Tank, investor and venture capitalist. Very topical topics we'll be discussing today with Kevin. Welcome back to Kitco. Good to see you, Kevin.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We're going to start with a topic that's not often discussed on our channel and with you as well. As our viewers may be aware, you've previously run for the Prime Minister of Canada for the Conservative Party. We're going to be touching on that later, but I want to touch on Canadian politics first and foremost and what's going on in this country. I'm based in Canada, as you know. Just as we're speaking, last night, the city of Ottawa declared a state of emergency because the trucker protest gridlocked the entire city. Now, they're protesting a bunch of different things, from mask mandates to basically loss of freedoms. How are you interpreting this movement? It's not something we see a lot in Canada. As you may be familiar, we have a reputation for being a little bit more demure and less vocal, usually, than our southern partners when it comes to politics. But here we are, national capital gridlocked and locked down. What's going on?
Well, it's very simple. There's no other words for it. Canadians are really pissed off. That's basically it. You can take them so far. They're generally middle of the road, low demeanor, just very easy to get along with, friendly people. But there is a point where they crack, and we found it now. They're extremely frustrated. We're in the middle of winter. It's a horrible time. It's dark at night. They're locked in their houses. The mandates around the provinces differ from the federal mandates. It's total confusion. And there's frustration in small business owners. That's the bulk of the Canadian economy, just like the U.S., where they don't know what they don't know anymore. They don't know when they're allowed to be open. They don't know how many people is over dense and is under dense if you're a restaurant. They don't know what the policy is. It's total confusion. And it also points out one of the frustrations that Canadians have realized about their healthcare system. You know, when it comes to catastrophic illness, Canada is very successful. Look at the cancer programs and some really difficult diseases. It's great to have that national healthcare mandate, but it also means we're underserved in terms of number of free beds. And so whenever you get a pandemic like this, which is not often, it immediately takes up all the capacity in provinces like Ontario. So the government has no choice but to shut down the economy over and over and over again. And that's what's happened here. It's so inconsistent that people have finally become so frustrated that they've taken to the streets. And as a result, a federal mandate, declare a state of emergency. I mean, that's just total chaos. And it really speaks to weakness in leadership. And that's difficult. I know Trudeau's been a very successful politician in terms of how long he's been in office. But I think right now, if you had an election, they'd kick him out.
Okay. I don't think that, well, some people have told me that they don't think the politicians would have locked down some of the cities and provinces that we've seen. Montreal, Quebec, for example, total lockdown for a month. They wouldn't have done that if the ratings in the polls weren't favorable to that outcome, right? So maybe there's some people out there who do support lockdowns even now. Do you agree with that?
It seems not. When they go to the streets and they're, it's just like going up to Frankenstein's castle. And that's what's going on here. They've got burning flames and they're really unhappy. So I wouldn't say that that's consistent in terms of the polls. People are not happy anymore with the situation they're finding in Canada. They see imagery of the rest of the world opening up. They're seeing it obviously happen in the United States. They feel far left behind. And that sense of lack of freedoms and government mandates that are inconsistent are very frustrating. Now, it's in a really interesting time because you've got a political shift going on. The Conservative Party has just dumped its second leader in a very short period of years, and they're very frustrated. They can't get any traction, and they can't get any candidates to compete with Trudeau. And there's a reason for that. It's very frustrating.
Okay. How would you rate Trudeau's cabinet performance over the last 2 years in the response to COVID?
Very poor. I would rate his mandate as very poor. You got to remember the parliamentary system, the prime minister, their job is to fill each file with very strong management. Great prime ministers reach across the aisle. They reach out to Canadians. They try and source people that know what they're doing in each of the mandates. For example, finance, you generally would take somebody that's well-known internationally as a banker or someone that worked their whole lives in financial services that has a long track record of financial policy. You wouldn't put a journalist in that role, but that's what we have in Canada. So when you go to G20 meetings, they probably think the finance minister of Canada is covering it from a journalistic perspective. I mean, it's pretty frustrating. When you look at military procurement, one of the largest budgets ever in Canada, ever, You would put somebody that actually knew how to deal with aerospace, perhaps, and military contracts. We don't have that either. So Trudeau is weak in the sense he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And I don't want to be too critical. Obviously, I want to show respect to the office of the Prime Minister, but I wouldn't hire him in any of my businesses. And the biggest business in Canada is Canada. I think he's in way over his head. I think Canadians are figuring that out now. And his mandate and his cabinet ministers are incredibly weak at what they do because they have no experience. It's so frustrating. It really is. Think about this. Canada is one of the wealthiest countries on earth, managed by some of the poorest managers you can hire. Boy, that's tough.
All right, let's talk about that. I want to go back to some of the mandates. Management criteria. If you were to evaluate a manager based on a list of criteria, what are they? What are the benchmarks? What are the barometers you'll be measuring these managers on? And how many of these criteria have Trudeau's cabinet met?
Executional excellence and experience. That's how it works in politics. That's how it works in business. You try and find people that basically know what they're doing because they've done it before and they've achieved it successfully. That doesn't mean you can't have great leaders from the arts or from other disciplines, but the point is, try and hire people that have had success in leadership positions. Instead of just saying all that matters is diversity, no, that's not true. Executional excellence matters also. You want both. We don't have that in Canada. We have a lot of inexperienced people running extremely large files. And I don't mean to be overly critical. This is just fact. And Canadians are figuring it out now. So what we have to do as Canadians, regardless of what your politics are, whether you're a liberal or conservative, is try and accommodate reaching out to Canadians that have achieved great success in their lives, great leadership skill sets, and attract them into leadership roles for 5 to 7 years in their careers. We can't seem to do that because we have a really strange and contorted finance law in politics. When you want to run a career or a campaign in any party, if you're not successful in paying back your campaign debt, we throw you in prison. How stupid is that? Why do you expect people that are not politicians to ever get into a mess like that? So when you try and figure out why don't we get great leaders into these leadership races, either provincially or federally in any party, we just get political hacks going over and over again. It goes to campaign finance laws. Let me explain how this works. If you're an existing politician sitting in the political seat and you've already got a campaign and a leadership race is announced in any party, you just do what you've done 52 weeks a year. You raise money for your leadership race. Now, when you bring people in from the outside, they're allowed to set up to raise money. They can raise money just like politicians can. But if they're an outsider and they don't have a political position now, the minute they lose the race, and remember, 99% of the people who go in the race lose, if they happen not to be politicians, they have 36 months to pay back their campaign debt or they go to jail. Now, even if you're a patriot, even if you want to serve your country, the threat of being in prison for trying to do that sounds stupid? Well, it is. And then you ask yourself, why do you keep getting mediocrity over and over again as a Canadian citizen? That's why. You basically have haves and have-nots. You're basically telling Canadians, if you come from a discipline outside of politics, you have great talent, great leadership skills, a fantastic career, a long talent in some of these disciplines like finance, military procurement, or whatever the mandate is, healthcare. Don't you even think of competing against a politician. We will throw you in jail. That is crazy. And that's why Canadians are destined to be led by mediocrity in perpetuity.
Okay, well, let's talk about the country's problems. If you were a shareholder of a company, there are certain metrics you will look at to evaluate the performance of management of that company. For example, if the company is consistently losing shareholder value or if they're turning around negative profits, you probably ask yourself, why is the CEO doing a poor job managing the company? What is wrong with Canada right now that would make you reevaluate management, so to speak?
Incredibly weak leadership skills at the provincial and federal level in pretty well every file. And so when you think about what Canada is and how it became so successful, it's its tremendous natural resources, its tremendous talent pool of people that graduate from its fantastic educational institutions. And where do they go? They leave Canada as fast as they can because they want to make money. Canada's a great place. Yeah, of course. I mean, the problem is we have become very uncompetitive in some very important areas like energy. We have basically shut down all the pipelines when other countries understood there was a transition period where you would basically make the profits from hydrocarbons and deploy them, reposition those profits into new types of energies. Instead, we just shut down all of our pipelines. That was a mistake. I put that at Justin Trudeau's feet. That's his mistake. He came into his mandate years ago and went out of his way to shut down all of the energy businesses in Canada, and many of them left in frustration. And today, in this year to date and last year, the best performing sector was energy, but Canada can't raise capital there because everybody knows the government hates hydrocarbons. So that's bad messaging on behalf of his government. And we could have been much more successful, like the Norwegians or the Swedish or the Nordic countries that know how to make that transition. In addition to that, we've got really, really big barriers to entry between provinces. Here in the United States, for example, if you're in a business, a multi-billion-dollar business like wine, you can compete in every state. In Canada, you can't ship wine from BC to Quebec because they've shut the borders down. It's crazy, but it's true. We've locked out our businesses against each other. Bad management. That's what that is.
All right, so I'm going to give you some of the problems. Well, you've addressed some of the problems already. Some other problems that we see in the country, and what you would do to fix these problems if you're running. First of all, are you running again for PM?
I won't run for PM again until we fix the campaign finance laws. I do not wish to go to prison. And so what I've done is I brought a lawsuit against the government about these campaign finance laws led by Joe Groy, a very famous Canadian constitutional lawyer. And every time it's been challenged in court, we've won. We keep moving our way up to the Supreme Court. That's where this is going to go. After I fix this problem for all Canadians, I would love to compete against a politician because we'll level the playing field. There'll be no advantage to being a politician. And obviously, they don't want this law to be changed because they basically make a living being politicians. And I mean no disrespect, but I would love to see some great Canadian leaders compete for leadership in all the parties without being put in prison for trying to do that. That's what I'm fixing with that law. And it'll eventually grind its way. It takes many years. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm a very fortunate Canadian. I'm able to finance this. And I'm giving back to my country by taking down this utterly insane, stupid law that keeps us breeding mediocrity in our political leadership. It's got to end. It has to end. Look, I hope to put it on my gravestone that I fixed this. This is horrible, but I just can't stand to watch this mediocrity manage such a rich country. It's so depressing.
Well, let's suppose you were in a leadership position tomorrow or come the next election. Let's just suppose, okay? Now, there's a lot of issues that you've addressed. Let's talk about these problems and how you would fix these problems. The first being, as you mentioned, the brain drain problem that we've seen for decades now. Young, talented graduates out of Canadian schools, where do they go? They go to the Tech Valley, Silicon Valley. They go to New York. They go to California. They go to Seattle. They don't stay in Vancouver, Montreal, or Toronto for the most part. Of course, a lot of people do. I'm not discounting the talents in that city, but a lot of people do leave for the southern neighbor, not so much the other way around. How do we fix that issue?
We have to be globally competitive. We have to set policies, taxation policies, basically energy policies that are competitive with the rest of the world. That's so important, and able to do that across all the different sectors. You think about technology, Canada really excels there. It's got fantastic agro businesses. It's got possibilities in pharma. It's got aerospace. It's got lots of different sectors that it can compete in if it had the right policies in place. And the way you do that, and then remember, it goes back to the role of Prime Minister. You have to fill these different files with talented people that understand how the international capital markets work, how the domestic capital markets work, and what policy makes the country competitive. We really punch above our weight in terms of talent, but as you've just pointed out, it always leaves and goes to larger markets where these individuals can make more money. They always come back to retire in Canada because it's such a wonderful place to live, but they don't build their businesses there because it's uncompetitive. So that's really about changing policy. And what we need is to figure out, why can't we attract great leadership? It goes back to campaign finance laws. This is an ugly circle. And so when you put somebody in a mandate like finance that's never run anything in finance, what do you expect is going to happen? Bad things. That's exactly what's happened.
Canada has historically had one of the highest corporate tax rates of the G7 countries. Now, recently, as you may be aware, there's been an implementation of the 15% minimum global corporate tax rate. Do you think that gives Canada a more level playing field?
No, there's been a suggestion to put that in place, but that'll never happen. That was one of Biden's mandates coming in. He's been weakened significantly, obviously. He's not going to get Build Back Better. He's going to get decimated in the midterms. That's a speculation, but it looks pretty bad. So there'll be no more policy out of Washington going anywhere near anything like that. It's very hard for the United States to dictate what international tax policy should be in places like Singapore, China, other Asian countries, India. They're happy to listen, but they're not going to make themselves less competitive. Ireland as well. Countries have to compete. That's how they work. And that's what they're going to do. So it's nice to listen to Yellen, tell them what to do. They'll smile, they'll nod, they'll do whatever they want to. So that's not going to happen. Canada's in the same boat. It's got to compete. So it has to have, we don't need to be the lowest tax rate in the world. We just need to be competitive. So that when capital decides, where am I going to deploy the next $100 billion, they at least consider Canada. They're certainly not doing that. In many sectors, we've chased businesses out of the country because we've made it so onerous to do business there. They've simply left, along with them, the talent pool that you just talked about.
Okay, well, the brain drain and the capital flight, those are issues. So competitiveness, corporate tax rate isn't really the core of the issue. What is then? What industries do the Canadians need to invest in to make the country as a whole more competitive globally? As you've mentioned, the country has traditionally been primarily invested in the resource sector, oil, natural gas, mining. It's a large part of the TSX. Is that the future of the country still, or is there another path, you think?
Absolutely, it's the future of the country. In addition, technology, in addition, healthcare advances. You know, when it comes to catastrophic illness, Canada leads in many, many countries in terms of the cures it provides. But listen, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, what made the country great in the first place? And why not support it? We are the richest country on earth. If you're a Canadian, and I'm proud to be one, but I have to disclose I'm also Irish and recently became an Emirati as well. Why an Emirati? Because they know how to do business there. And I'm proud to be a citizen of that country too. But I was born in Montreal, so I'm very akin to what the challenges are in Canada. So what we have to do is understand we have all the natural resources the world wants. We have the water, we have the paper, we have all the precious metals, we have all the basic commodities. We have to embrace that and become very competitive with those, because that is where the cash flow comes from to reinvest in technology and healthcare and advanced sciences and agroscience, all of that. And we don't want to taint our relationships with giant trading partners like the United States and China. When you have weak management, a weak foreign minister, a weak finance minister, a weak prime minister, all you find yourself is in chaos with your big trading partners. And that's where Canada is today. It's an absolute mess and it's very frustrating. But I always offer this encouragement to Canadians. Think of it this way. No matter how weak the management is, the country is so wealthy, it can sustain poor management for a very long time. When we get the chance to sweep them away with a spatula, hopefully in the next election, we can fix it like that. We can really fix it because the country has so much wealth. That's why you've got to be an optimist as a Canadian.
I got one more and then we'll move on to cryptocurrencies and your investments. Inflation in Canada is a problem. Inflation is not just a problem in the U.S., it's a problem all over the world, but in particular Canada. Young people can't buy homes now. I'm not just talking about Canadian consumer price inflation. I'm talking about asset price inflation as well. In particular, real estate has been expensive, overvalued, some might say, for many, many years. Younger people like myself can't buy a home on their salaries because of how unaffordable houses in Toronto and Vancouver are. Now in Montreal, it's starting to look like that as well. So there's a brain drain out of the country simply because the country's not affordable to live in. How would you fix that problem?
You know, those problems usually fix themselves because what happens is as the economies recover, and I certainly can't say that about the Canadian economy yet, it looks pretty frustrating because we keep shutting it down due to these inconsistent COVID policies. But we spent a lot of time printing money. All of these free loans to businesses, and I'm not saying they weren't necessary at the beginning of the pandemic when it was sheer chaos, but of recent times, I think we've lost the balance. We've shut down so many provinces, shut down so many businesses. We continue to print Canadian dollars. We put tremendous pressure on the inflationary forces, including on hard assets like housing. You got to stop printing free money, and these things will adjust accordingly. And I think it's time now in Canada to open up the economy because I think we're in the back end of this pandemic. We just need to get in sync the federal policies with the provincial and municipal policies. There's so much inconsistency in those rules. Quebec deciding that they may make people pay if they don't get vaccinated. All of that stuff was just chaos. And at the end of the day, we really got to get some consistency, and it boils down to leadership. We don't have any.
Well, the issue is, it's an interesting problem. We've got a lot of capital coming from overseas, in particular Asia, but they're not going into startups, they're not going into stocks or businesses, they're going into hard assets, right? So it's an issue of redirecting that capital into, I guess, more productive means. Is there a way to make that incentive happen or not?
When you try and manipulate markets by setting policy that, gets capital to move away from, let's say, hard assets like housing or land, it just contorts pricing. It's better just to let the market be the market. But the truth is, many people would love to come to Canada and start a business if the policy was pro-business, but it's not.